Malvern Books, thank you so much for being here for this reading that we're really excited about. We're really excited that Carl Phillips is here. And we want to thank the Michener Center for making this reading happen and for partnering with us in terms of hosting it. Yes. Before we start, if everyone could turn off any devices that might make noise during the reading, that would be awesome. And I'll go ahead and introduce Carl's introducer. Brett Anthony Johnston is a native Texan. His fiction titles include the novel Remember Me Like This and the story collection Corpus Christi. He assumed the directorship of the Michener Center for Writers at UT in July 2017. Please welcome Brett Anthony Johnston.
Thank y'all. If you haven't been up here before, if you have any designs on stealing this music stand, there's a label on it. It says Malvern Books, so it's not going to go far. I'm Brett Anthony Johnston, as Stephanie kindly said, the director of the Michener Center for Writers. Before I offer a short introduction of Carl Phillips, I want to thank Malvern Books, not just for hosting us tonight, but for everything the store does for independently published contemporary literature, not least of all poetry. I also want to thank Billy and Holly from the Michener Center who have worked out every last detail of Carl's visit. I'm grateful to them, to Malvern, and all of you for being part of Carl's time in Austin. One of the first things I did when I arrived at the Michener Center was ask the fellows in every genre which writers they admired. For the poets, the name that kept coming up again and again was Carl Phillips. I don't think any of them actually thought we'd be able to get him down here, and they certainly seem to think I'm a lot cooler for having pulled off such a literary hat trick. But in truth, when I invited Carl to teach a week-long workshop, he agreed right away. He's one of those rare writers who cares as deeply about teaching as he does his own poetry. And despite this month's publication of his 14th collection of poems, The Beautiful and Stirring Wild as the Wind, he still made time for us. Of course, Malvern's has Wild as the Wind tonight, and you should all buy 1 to 5 copies. A recent review in the Washington Post noted that the book features poems that counterbalance the love and fear, memory, and the mirage of history, despair, and the willingness of hope for ideals, loyalty, wholeness, honesty. The writing dazzles with transcendent metaphors, complex connections, and linguistic flourishes. But back to the students. To see them come out of Carl's workshop is to see the effect that a great teacher can have. However, it's too easy to say that Carl has inspired them. He has, of course he has, but more than that, he has challenged and ignited them. He's given them that rare gift of taking their work seriously, and in turn, they will take it more seriously for the rest of their careers. If one of the first things that I did was ask the Michener Fellows who they wanted to work with, the most recent thing I've done is ask the writers in Carl's workshop to tell me how it's going. I was struck by how many of the responses spoke to the fellows' long-standing relationship with his work, how he's been teaching them in person and on the page for years and years, how lasting and profound his impact has been. One writer wrote, "He's exactly what I needed. I want to give you a better answer, I really do, but I need to work on this poem. I'm sorry." Another wrote, "Something I deeply admire about Carl's work is his ability to imbue meditative poetry with such energy, and the way he weds mystery with utter clarity. I've been so impressed and touched by his thoroughness and the care with which he responded to our work, and his humility when discussing his own life as a poet." And finally, one wrote, "I first met Carl at a fellowship I got in undergrad. He did not seem to take a shine to my poems back then, and also told me I needed to quit smoking. I'm pleased to report that my poems are now much better, and I did indeed quit smoking." So there you have it. Carl Phillips saves lives. For that, for his poems, for his generosity to me and all of our writers, It's my absolute pleasure to ask him to come to the stage tonight. Please welcome Carl Phillips.
Thank you. Thanks. Just negotiating the music stand for a second. My water's going to be balanced. It's a real pleasure to be here at Malvern Books, and it's been great to be here at the Michener Center. Thanks for inviting me. Brett, thanks for the introduction. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Billy and Holly. The workshop students, I'm glad not keep thinking each day they're not going to show up again. They're not going to show up, and they are still here. So that's terrific. There's still tomorrow. Maybe they won't show up after this. We'll see. So yeah, and I apologize for being a little bit. When I first arrived here, the students were talking about mescal bars and things like that we were going to go and hang out at, and then I kind of got a cold and turned into a boring person. But you know, mescal another night. Who knows? All right, so I'll read some poems. Am I supposed to do anything after that? Am I supposed to do questions?
Sign books.
Oh, okay, just hang out. And I don't usually say too much in between poems. I mean, I guess I will if I feel like it's awkward, but I never know what to say, and I don't trust myself to talk a lot off script. So this is called Courtship. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm hoping I'm on the sort of sexier side of having a cold. Sounds kind of rugged. All right, courtship. Both things, I think, but less the hesitation of many hands touching the stunned dethronement of the master's body than their way of touching it again, each time more surely. Brief. Somehow, I've been talking a lot about compression this week and how everyone should write fewer words. And I'm all about that myself. Swimming. Some nights, I rise from the latest excuse for why not stay a while. Usually that hour when the coyotes roam the streets as if they've always owned the place and had come back inspecting now for damage. But what hasn't been damaged? History here means a history of storms rushing the trees for so long their bowed shapes seem a kind of star. Worth trusting, I mean, as in how the helmsman, steering home, knows what star to lean on. Do people anymore even say helmsman? Everything in waves, or at least wave-like, as when another's suffering, being greater, displaces our own, or I understand it should, which is meant to be different, I'm sure of it, from that pleasure Lucretius speaks of, in witnessing from land a ship foundering at sea, though more and more it all seems related. I love the nights here. I love the jetty's black ghost finger, how it calms the harbor, how the fog hanging stranded just above the water is fog finally, not the left behind parts of those questions from which I half wish I could school my mind, desperate cargo, to keep a little distance. An old map from when this place was first settled shows monsters everywhere once the shore gives out. It can still feel like that. I dive in, and they rise like faithfulness itself, watery pallbearers heading seaward, and I the raft they steady. It seems there's no turning back. I kind of like that roar of the crowd in the back of that. I don't know, it sounds good. Communal is how it sounds. That's not the title of this poem. It's called Brothers in Arms. The sea was one thing once, the field another. Either way, something got crossed or didn't. Who's to say about happiness? Whatever country I mean, where inconceivable is a word like any other, lies far behind me now. I've learned to spare what's failing if it can keep what's living alive still, maybe just a while longer. Ghost bamboo that the birds nest in, for example, not noticing the leaves, color of surrender, color of poverty, as I used to imagine it when I myself was poor, but had no idea of it. I've always thought gratitude's the one correct response to having been made, however painfully, to see this life more up close. The higher gods having long refused me, let the gods deemed lesser do the best they can. So a friend I somewhere along the way lost hold of used to drunkenly announce, usually just before passing out. I think he actually believed that stuff. He must surely by now be dead. There's a rumored humbling effect to loss that I bear no trace of. It's not loss that humbles me. What used to look like memory, clouds for hours breaking, gathering, then breaking up again, lately seems instead like a dance, one of those slower, too complicated numbers I never had much time for. Not knowing exactly what it's come to is so much different from understanding that it's come to nothing. Why is it then, each day, they feel more the same? This poem is called Meditation on Being a Mystery to Oneself, which really could be the title of the whole book, or the whole life. But it works for one poem. Meditation on Being a Mystery to Oneself. The oars of the ship called Late Forgiveness lift, then fall. The slaves at the oars have done singing. It's pure work now. The galley master stands, as always, whip in hand, but for the moment in idleness. They say when discipline dreams, it's just the one dream. Hands breaking from stillness, like hands, of course, but like hands when, having lost a thing entirely, they move entirely by definition. The ship moves slowly. It's a ship. It's a storm-beclouded stronghold in the dark, receding. They say discipline's flag is blue, 3 deer in flight, 3 stars barely show above them. No, that's what I'm going to say. But what am I going to say about this? Not to be scared when you hear the words Marcus Aurelius. You already got past Lucretius. This is called Not the Waves as They Make Their Way Forward. Like Virgil, Marcus Aurelius died believing that his triumphs, when pitched against his failures, had come to very little. I don't know. Given the messiness of most lives, humble, legendary, all the rest in between, their interiors, I mean, it's hard to say he was wrong. Black night, black train, freight of worries, things that stay the same. Having reached that point that even the luckiest sometimes never get close to, where desire at last offers nothing more nor less than what restraint can, Marcus Aurelius wrote down some thoughts meant apparently only for himself, though they became meditations, a book without which, by now, he'd pretty much be forgotten. It begins with gratitude. How it ends is painful, if I'm remembering right. But it isn't pain. This next poem is all one extended fragment. Do you wonder, like, is it ever going to end? Yes. But also, if you think, will there ever be a main verb? No. So it's part of the radicalness. Gold leaf. To lift without ever asking what animal exactly it once belonged to, the socketed helmet that what's left of the skull equals up to your face, to hold it there, mask-like, to look through it until looking through means looking back through the skull, into the self that is partly the animal you've always wanted to be, that, depending, fear has prevented or rescued you from becoming, to know utterly what you'll never be, to understand in doing so what you are, and say no to it, not to who you are, to say no to despair. Sort of a little mantra of mine once in a while. Say no to despair. Remember? Say no. Oh, okay. I'll live another day. This is called From a Bonfire. See why I don't say much in between? But I hate it when people just tell you stuff like, yeah, I was babysitting my niece, and then I saw a goose, and then I wrote this poem, it's called Goose. You know? That doesn't help anyone. Okay, so this is called From a Bonfire. There's plenty I miss still that I wouldn't want back, which I'm beginning to think might be all regrets ever had to mean. And there's maybe no shame then in having known some, and all these years I've pretty much been wrong. Not that being wrong means wasting time exactly. What hasn't been useful? Having grown up with bonfires each October, having equated them with fall, the communion especially of leaves falling, fire as what both defined the dark, easily taken for granted, and kept the dark at bay. Surely that's been worth something, for it stays with me. In that way, it even now marks a difference between who I was and what I've since become, a kind of bonfire myself, unattached, though, to any time of year in particular. Instead, a season of the mind entirely, as unpredictable in occurrence as in intensity, cracked, blue, forever half done departing, not so different, after all, maybe, from the darkness against which I'm at once more apparent and somehow more betrayed. What has restlessness been for? The darkness asks, as if that were the question, when the darkness itself is its own question, the most honest one left, as far as I can see, that's worth asking, that I keep meaning to ask, then faltering, not at all out of fear, I think. I don't think I'm afraid, but being fire and restless. Howdy. I said howdy before I ever came to Austin, just so you know. I just say that. I don't want you to think I'm trying to get my Austin on. And love you too. When he describes a spear passing through the throat of some otherwise bronze-protected warrior, part of what Homer means is death, and there's a piece that isn't. The way black can resemble more a brightness sometimes, or how wind can vacillate between being a force bearing down on a field and what, for a time at least, from beneath, gives or seems to give to the field some agency. For the gods in Homer, there's an at once lovely and less than lovely patterning to the brutality that, even as they wield it, is only theirs to borrow. Fate stakes the final claim, as if forever breaking ground for an imagined city from which the idea is that a vast empire like a fist opening fans out eventually across all things divine and mortal. Just as softly as the face, when the body's sleeping, returns to childhood, closer, deeper, says the hole in history called Mouth of Homer, because it helps to name. Not the song that fog-muffled bells make after storm. Nothing winged and lost, rising. Blood's what the wound keeps gushing. I don't know why that poem's called And Love You Too. Good question. It's not very romantic. But, you know, to be honest, sometimes I don't know what to call poems. Increasingly, I don't know. I've been doing a thing where I use lines from old poems of mine as titles, and I think that's fair. Or I just steal musical titles. Well, like Wild as the Wind. That's a big one. And this one too is from a musical song. Well, all songs are musical. It's from a song, If You Go Away. Okay, if you go away. When death finds me, if there be sight at all, let me see as the torn coyote does, turning its head briefly, looking not with understanding, but recognition at where the flesh falls open around a wound that more resembles the marsh violet's petals, that hard to detect at first darkening that happens soft, steadily toward the flower's throat. Why not let go of it, I used to think, meaning that instinct by which the body shields itself from what threatens it unexpectedly. A fist, the next so-called unbearable question that's bearable after all. Voila, surprise. I know death's an abstraction, but I prefer a shape to things, though the shapes are changeable. In my latest version, death is a young man with a habit for using one side of his mouth to blow his hair slightly up from his brow, while with the other half, he mutters things like, each time I leave, it's like I've left forever. Behind him, stray cabbage moths lifting up from the catalpas blossoms make it seem as if one bloom had flown free from the others, fluttering mirror from a clutch of still ones. There's a kind of love that doesn't extend itself both ways between two people equally because it doesn't have to. There is such a love. This is called What the Lost Are For. Here, before these shadows that, in their disappearing, returning, them falling as softly again elsewhere, have sometimes seemed the first and last lesson left on the nature of power, though they are not that. I bow my head. I bend my knee. I hardly care, I think, anymore who goes there. Only let me pass, however flawed, among them. My fears not stripped from me, but kept hidden, as more often than not, just beneath stamina, somewhere grace too lies hidden. Nobody speaks to me as you do. Nowhere water-lit do the leaves pale faster. I'm told that's about as romantic as I get. No, so I'm going to let you know what's coming up, because this is around when I wonder what's happening, and how much is coming at me. So there are 4 more poems, and then we'll reset. Wouldn't that be nice? And none of them is in, because I've been told that at readings too. I've got 4 more poems, and then the next to last one, this one's in 11 sections. You need to know the following material. This is going to be like that. Okay, this is called His Master's Voice. See, that's the thing you're not getting, though, the part about honesty being, at worst, a bruising experience, at best, a bruisable one. I woke regretting everything all over again, since when is that a crime? And then woke wanting the kind of sentence whose unfolding brings to mind a road so untraveled that indistinguishable brown birds do their dust bath thing right there in the middle of it, to either side the shot bedragglement of wild dahlias, their fake-looking posture of half-collapse, swoon of summer, the heat behaving the way, eventually, the facts do, with a truth more difficult to touch than usual, that same haloing out around it. Think sea anemones when seen from above, through water, and softly waving. I'm personally very proud that I got sea anemones out without stumbling. This is called The Way One Animal Trusts Another. This is an example. That title is the next to last line of a poem, 6 books ago or something. But I figured, well, no one remembers those. And so I can start, kind of borrowing. And then someone will think there's a theory to it, maybe, and decide, oh, he planned it. This poem speaks to the other one in some subtle way. Nope. The way one animal trusts another. Somewhere between what it feels like to be at one with the sea and to understand the sea as mere context for the boat whose engine refuses finally to turn over. Yeah, I know the place. Stumbled into it myself once, twice almost. All around and in between the two trees that grow there, tree of compassion and much taller, tree of pity, its bark more bronze. The snow settled as if an openness of any kind meant as well a woundedness that, by filling it, the snow might heal. You know what I think? I think if we're lost, you should know exactly where by now. I've watched you stare long and hard enough at the map already. I'm beginning to think I may never not be undecided about all sorts of things. Whether snow really does resemble the broken laughter of the long abandoned when what left comes back big time. Whether gratitude's just a haunted space, like any other. This place sounds daily more like a theater of war each time I listen to it. Loss, surprise, victory being only three of the countless fates, if you want to call them that we don't so much live with, it seems, as live for now among. If as close as we're ever likely to get, you and I, is this close. Yes, you can end a poem without ending the sentence. Yes. And so you're counting and thinking there better be only two. Yep, just two. So here's the penultimate. So I haven't said penultimate enough today. This is called Crossing. Now that, at best, we'd rode halfway across the woods that we mostly thought of our lives as, despite the fact of water, accepting our position and understanding it still mattered, but not like remembering what the point had been, why we set out at all from the very start. To release something, but what? Whatever the erotic version might be of a soul we ourselves scarce believed in. A persuasive sound to that, but if nothing else, we'd at least learned to trust sound only so far, even as we had to figure out the hard way to stop giving out trust as if trust were sex, and not what more often just gets confused with sex. Above us, what sang like water was just the wash of trees, now moving, now at rest in a wind's disruption. A slight rustling beneath us, as of fruit unfalling from the ground it fell to, each time we'd lift our oars free of the waves and steady them there. Respite, shadows in a mirror, bruises on the larger bruise of the sea's black face. I'm going to finish with the title poem, Wild as the Wind, which everyone says, yeah, cat power. And then I say no, and they say, David Bowie. Nope. And then, who? But Nina Simone sang that song, and probably someone before her. So, just to say, that's the idea I have in mind. Wild as the wind. Yes, and don't be afraid when the word metaphysical. Wild as the wind. About what's past, hold on when you can, I used to say. And when you can't, let go. As if memory were one of those mechanical bowls, easily dismountable, should the ride turn rough. I lived in those days at the forest's edge, metaphorically, so it can sometimes seem now, though the forest was real, as my life beside it was. I spent much of my time listening to the sounds of random, unknowable things dropping or being dropped from, variously, a middling height or a great one, until by winter it was just the snow falling, each time like a new, unnecessary taxonomy or syntax for how to parse what's plain. Snow, from which the occasional lost hunter would emerge every few or so seasons, and just once, a runaway child, whom I gave some money to and told no one about, having promised. You must keep what you've promised very close to your heart. That way you'll never forget, is what I've always been told. I've been told quite a lot of things. They hover, some more unbidden than others, in that part of the mind where mistakes and torn wishes echo as in a room that's been newly cathedraled, so that the echo surprises, though lately it's less the echo itself that can still most surprise me about memory. It's more the time it takes going away. A mouth opening to say, I love sex with you too. It doesn't mean I want to stop my life for it, for example. Or just a voice, mouthless, asking, since when does the indifference of the body's stance when we're alone, unwatched, in late light, amount to cruelty? For the metaphysical poets, the problem with weeping for what's been lost is that tears wash out memory, and by extension, what we'd hoped to remember. If I refuse increasingly to explain, isn't explanation, at the end of the day, what the sturdier truths most resist? It's been my experience that tears are useless against all the rest of it, that if I could, I'd forget. That I keep wanting to stay should count at least for something. I'm not done with you yet. Thanks.
Again, thank you all so much for coming. Carl is going to be sitting behind the books over there, and so please go buy a copy of the book, ask him to sign it, talk to him, have a good time. Thanks, y'all.